When it comes to bait, not a lot changes for me throughout the year. There are times that I make slight little tweaks and add bits to the bait and take things away. But for the most part, I stick with the hemp, corn and boilie, 10mm live system. Sometimes if there's some nuisance fishing, I'll go up to 15mm live system in the mix. But that hemp, corn and boilie principle stays the same throughout the year. That makes the main bulk of my mix. But there are a few things that I do slightly different as the year progresses. One of the biggest changes that I've made in recent years, and particularly so this year, is that when it comes to about mid-September, the water temperatures start to cool off and I start to add bloodworm to the mix. Now, frozen bloodworm is just incredible. If for anyone that's ever seen it, carp love bloodworm. It's their natural food, is what they're sort of sifting through the silt for, trying to look for all the time. And the frozen bloodworm, when you actually get a scoop of it out, there is so much bait in there and it's so full of attraction and it stinks. And I just start adding that to the mix from September onwards, basically. When the water temperature sort of cools down, it seems to be that natural bait seems to work so much better. Now, don't get me wrong, it probably would work all the way through the year, but for me, I believe it really comes into its own as that water temperature starts to cool down. So this year was a funny one for me. I've been fishing farriers for most of the summer really, and I've been catching a lot of fish. I'd had sort of around 40 fish through the summer and I hadn't got amongst any of the big uns at all really. I've managed to have a nice sort of 37-pound common, but there was a lot of fish over 40-pound in there and I'd not caught any of them in amongst the 40 fish. Then all of a sudden it come to September and I started adding bloodworms to the mix. Now, I don't know how much of a coincidence this is, but my first trip that I put bloodworm in the mix, I had a couple of 40s, which was a hell of a result, 2 of the big uns. My next trip I had 7 40s, and then the next couple of trips I had another 6 40s. So in 14 nights angling, I ended up having 15 40s. Now, it could be a complete coincidence, but it all happened from when I started adding bloodworm into the mix. Now, don't get me wrong, as the later on in the year you get from September onwards, you always stand a better chance of catching those bigger fish. But it literally, my fortunes just completely transformed, like a flick of a switch. Started adding it into the mix, started catching a lot of bigger fish. Now I wasn't really catching more fish. My catch rate still continued the same. I was catching a decent amount of fish quite consistently. So I didn't catch a lot more fish or anything, but the average size just suddenly increased. And as I said, whether that is the bloodworm going into the mix or whether it's just the fact that the year was getting on and the bigger fish start to feed, I still don't know for sure. But one thing is for sure is that the addition of bloodworm to the mix certainly didn't do me any harm this autumn. So one of the questions I regularly get asked is how much bloodworm I actually put into the mix and sort of what are the ratios. So to give you sort of like a good example is typically on farriers I've been putting in about 1.5 kilos to start with of my normal mix, and then just a big sort of handful of bloodworm in that mix all stirred up to get it going. I think when you scoop up a big handful of bloodworm, you can see there is literally hundreds of thousands of actual bloodworm in there. So just a little handful goes a long way, you don't have to pile in loads. In fact, I think if you were to pile in too much, it would probably go the opposite way. The fish could become preoccupied. So just a nice size handful per mix. So as I said, I was putting out about 1.5 kilos of bait to start with like a nice dollop of bloodworm in. Then every time I was topping up between fish, I was probably putting only 1 kilo a mix with just a nice handful of bloodworm in. And that kind of built. So once you start getting bites and you keep trickling a bit more bait in, get another bite, put a bit more bait in, that bloodworm just leaks out into the water column and it literally almost attracts the fish in. There's no shadow of a doubt in my mind that bloodworm attracts fish into your swim. Don't get me wrong, if all the fish are up the other end of the lake, you're not just going to draw them down to your end. That's never going to happen. You're relying on getting in the right area to start with and having fish in the area. But without a doubt, once you start getting that bait going in and getting bites, the fish seem to return to that spot on a regular basis. After an incredible autumn on farriers, I finished up on there in about mid-November and took a few weeks off, and I'm now into December. I've come down to the wonderful Milton Abbas for a quick guest session with Ian, the boss man. And yeah, we got down yesterday evening. The lake's been fishing pretty hard. He's only been doing 1 or 2 fish a week tops for the last few weeks. and decided to give the Bloodworm a go in the mix on here, you know, new venue, see if it works. And it certainly does, because I had a nice scaly banger this morning, an incredible fish. You know, his autumn colours, it was really red, chestnut colour, and it was an absolute beauty. It just goes to show that the Bloodworm does work on a variety of venues, and it's certainly something that I wouldn't leave home without over the colder months.